going on, everyone? This is going to be my Vortex Pinnacle tank walkthrough guide, and we're going to go ahead and talk pull by pull. So we open up here with our first pull is the double pull. Reason for doing this, really on any difficulty, regardless of whether or not it's fortified or tyrannical, is because this pull can just take incredibly long if you don't just do it all at once. The fact that your melee can't stay in for this is really a huge pain, so you're going to want to do everything that you can to try to mitigate that, and the best way to do that is just by pulling them all at once, trying to AoE down what you can, but in general this is just a longer pull. You can go ahead and lust this if you'd like on Fortified Week, but you want to hold lust for Tyrannical Week for the first boss. Now these little storm elementals, these tempests, all you have to do is look at them and then they go away. You don't have to attack them or anything like that, just look in their general direction and they'll hide. For this first pull, you can go ahead and double pull this on Tyrannical with the next pull as long as you have enough interrupts. All three of these need to be interrupted, otherwise they can pelt down any one of your team members pretty easily, which is why we're only single pulling here on Fortified Week. Also, we're in a pug group, so coordination is a little bit different. This next group here has only one caster that needs to be interrupted, so it's not nearly as bad. So that's why you need the 4 interrupts if you do decide to go ahead and double pull these together. These don't hit overly hard, but what I will say, one thing about this dungeon is that it's got a really good mix of both magic damage profiling as well as physical damage. So as a bear, it's the first half of the dungeon is actually a little bit harder than the second half of the dungeon, just because the first half is a little bit more magic heavy. So getting those interrupts and getting those stuns, disorients, whatever you need to do, is really, it makes a huge difference as a bear. Your mileage may vary, just depending on which tank that you're playing. This pack in general has a lot of prior interrupt targets. As you can see, we had 2 go off at the same time. We had 2 people go down at once here. So you got to do what you can to try to organize that to the best of your ability. This is always a good place to go ahead and blow any tank cooldowns that you have, just to make this a little bit easier. Try to keep them grouped up. You will have them charging out here into the group. Just make sure that you're regrouping as quickly as possible. Death Knight grips are very big on that pack. Alright, so for this next one, we've got our first Prince of the dungeon, and it's mixed with these 2 Vortex. So we're going to go ahead and interrupt the Vortex, and then these Princes are going to do this push mechanic that it's going to try to push you off of the edge here. For the most part, you can go ahead and cleave off of the Prince as long as you're interrupting the 2 Vortex, and this is a pretty easy pull. You want to stay out of the AoE, which looks like, there it is, a little cloud swirly thing. You want to stay out of that. It will one-shot you if you stand inside of it on either Tyrannical or Fortified. It's very obvious, and people really shouldn't be getting clipped by that. So we've got a double Prince pull here. Again, very similar to the previous pull, only you're not dealing with the 2 Vortex to interrupt. So just go ahead and try to keep these grouped together as much as you can. If you're playing as DPS, you want to make sure that you're standing in a good position so you don't get blown off the edge. You want to push against the wind push here as much as possible, but you're also going to want to look to pop some defensives and some self-healing as a tank, just to make sure that your healer can focus on the rest of the group. There's a lot of AoE damage that goes out there. Now for this first boss, the most important thing is making sure that you have a clean interrupt order, and make sure that as few casts get off as possible here. Additionally, you're all going to want to make sure you're facing a different side of the boss, so facing the boss at a different angle. That's primarily because you've got these elementals on the outside of the room that need to be looked at again to hide, so that they just are a non-mechanic throughout the entirety of the boss fight. So as long as you're spreading out and everyone's facing a different direction, you won't have any of those tempests going off. The tempest will absolutely wipe your group if you let them stay up long enough. Other than that, you really just want to watch your feet. You want to stay out of this stuff as much as possible. We always like to have our Demon Hunter use Darkness on the first one there, because there's a lot of AoE damage that goes out. But overall, this is a pretty easy fight where you just got to watch your feet, make sure you're not standing in these orbs like I just did there, and ultimately just make sure those tempests don't come out of hiding, and it's just a wash and repeat type of fight. As you can see, I chose to leave the healer down just because there wasn't a whole lot going on Fortified Week. This is a 21 Fortified, and as long as people are playing clean, there's really no need to res. Alright, so now we move into the second third of the dungeon, where you actually get a good mix of both physical and magical damage. The first part was much more magical heavy, and you get a good mix here. So for these squalls, you want to make sure that you are purging their shields and you are interrupting their casts. Disorients and stuns work as well, and for the most part, you can avoid any kind of silly play just by making sure that you're keeping that stuff in check. So if you've got a purge in the group, you're going to be working overtime to keep those shields off, and you just go ahead and pull those two groups together so that you can avoid pulling the flares a little later on. Now, depending on how you want to do this, if you have high confidence in your group, you can go ahead and pull these assassins in with the dragon. The one thing that I will caution against is that these assassins will port on top of your other team members. And so if someone is standing deep within the healing circle that the dragon spawns, you're just going to heal up the assassins to full. So if you want to play it safe, pull them separately. If you want to coordinate your group a little bit better, then have them stand as close as they can to the outer portion of the ring, and then as a tank, you just don't stand in the ring at all when you're pulling the assassins with the dragon. Otherwise, if you're doing this solo, everyone can go ahead and safely stack in the healing ring, help your healer out. Again, we did this mainly because it's fortified and we just wanted to make the dragons as easy as possible, especially without the full group coordination that we would normally have. So once that's down, this pack is actually a little bit more dangerous than people give it credit for. You've got 4 casters that need to be interrupted, and so you want to make sure that you're doing that. Otherwise, they'll just single target down different members of the group, and if the same member gets hit twice, you're probably looking at a death here. So keep them grouped up, keep them stunned, keep them interrupted, and this pack becomes a non-issue. Alright, so next up we've got a 4 assassin pull. Same deal here. As I mentioned before, you can pull this into the dragon if you have a high level of confidence that your group is not going to heal them up. Otherwise, the safer route is just to pull them separately. You're not going to lose a ton of time by doing it this way. These assassins do have an interrupt mechanic, but for the most part, it's when they port on top of another group member that they're the most dangerous, so the healer just needs to be on top of it. Alright, so we've got a single dragon pull here. We're all taking advantage of the healing circle. And then we've got our darkness down there as well. The breath is probably the safest time to fight the dragon as long as everyone moves out. It's free damage uptime, so just keep that in mind. Make sure your positioning is in a good spot and you'll be fine. We end up pulling in these other adds at the last second, and the main reason why is because we just want to priority focus and cleave off of the dragon, but we also want to take advantage of that healing circle. We actually ended up having our priest make a little bit of a mistake there and didn't get his dispersion off in time. Otherwise it would have been a much cleaner pull and we would have had a whole lot more uptime on these guys. So this pull takes longer than it should. It is a bit of a risky pull if you don't have the full group coordination, which again we don't have in this group. So just keep that in mind. We had too many deaths on this, and really this is probably the one area of the dungeon that slowed us down the most as a result. So just make sure that the entire group is on the same page if you're going to be doing this. If you do pull those in late with the dragon, you're going to want to make sure that you lust that pull. And then once that's done, we get it cleaned up, and then we're going to be off to the second boss. Alright, so this boss really gave people a hard time at the beginning of this tier. Ever since then, it seems like it's mellowed out a little bit. So let's go ahead and talk through it. The best thing you can do is pull the dragon on top of the middle swirl. That way you're just kind of able to play in between these whirlwinds without actually having the risk of running through them. For these, you want to make sure that you're jumping in the tornadoes to make sure you go over them. Just keep in mind there is that telegraph, and where the telegraph is, that's not as big as the ground effect is when it originally spawns, so you can stand a little close to it, and you can just kind of, once you're used to positioning it, you can make sure that your uptime's a little bit higher just by getting close enough to it, and then from there, going ahead and jumping up. So you'll have time to position yourself, especially if you have a wind change and you have to move. You'll be able to position yourself for a more optimal positioning. The biggest thing here for the entire group is just to make sure that the wind is always at your back. As long as it is, you'll have a haste buff, and everyone will be popping off on damage. That's also the reason why we don't feel the need to lust this boss. Even really on Tyrannical, you can get away with not lusting this boss. And that's primarily because everyone has a little bit of a mini lust throughout the entirety of the fight. It can take longer on Tyrannical, but overall it can be a net gain if you do big enough pulls. Alright, so this back half of the dungeon is largely physical damage with a little bit of casting damage. So, as I mentioned, you're going to have all three types of damage profiles throughout. These adds are highly more physical than the first 2/3 of the dungeon. And so, as such, just make sure you're using mitigation that works towards the physical mitigation advantages. And these pulls there's really nothing you can do. They're a controlled pull size. There's not a whole lot of creativity in this dungeon. It's pretty much just press W and go. Little tip for druids, just because I don't see this often, you can travel form in here even though you can't mount. So that's a big one. Alright, so this is our first pull with the Minister and the Lightning Field here. When the Minister targets someone with Lightning Lash, you want to make sure that you're standing within the Lightning Field here to take no damage. If you're standing outside of it, you're going to get absolutely trucked. Doesn't matter if it's fortified or tyrannical, you'll probably die. That's really the only mechanic that you need to be aware of on these pulls with the Minister. Just look at who they're targeting, make sure that whoever the Lightning Lash is on is in the Lightning Field, and you should be fine. The rest of these things do hit pretty hard, so just be aware of that. Use a lot of your high mitigation skills, and you should be okay as a tank. We're going to go ahead and skip those flares, and we're going to go ahead and jump down to this next area. We're able to skip those flares just because we pulled the 2 dragons. Alright, so this pull has 2 adepts in it, and one thing that we're doing here, since we have a Shadow Priest, is we actually have the Shadow Priest mind control one of the adepts for the rest of the dungeon all the way through the last boss. So you'll see that can cause a little bit of problem later on, but for the most part it's a net gain for the group. It provides extra healing, extra damage, and as long as the priest is on top of it, you're generally pretty much in a good spot for the rest of the dungeon. We're going to move on here to our next Minister pull here in a second. Once these are down, again, we're just making sure that we're keeping the adept mind controlled. Just popped out. He's going to re-mind control it now, and then we go into our next pull here. A lot of people like to CC at least one of the 2 mobs on the end on this pull. As a bear, I haven't really seen a reason to do that. I know some other tanks would prefer it. I see a lot of Demon Hunters caging it. But with Incarnate, it's actually easy just to take on the whole group all at once. You want to make sure that you're interrupting the servants. You're also going to want to make sure that Earth Shatter doesn't get off as well. Again, if you get Lightning Lash from the Minister, make sure that you're inside of the Lightning Field. And this pack isn't too hard, but it does do a lot of damage, so you need a lot of physical mitigation in order to make this worthwhile. You saw the Adept just snapped out of mind control. We got him back, and we're going to be bringing him down to the last boss area. Alright, so this is the last pull of the dungeon. This would normally bring you to 100% if you did not mind control the Adept, which again, we're bringing that into the last boss, so we're going to be killing the Adept after the last boss. So we're going to go ahead and get him re-CC'd here. Got him mind controlled, and then we go into the boss. This boss is probably more mechanical than quite a few others, so I'll talk through just a couple of things to be aware of. That chain lightning that went out, whoever it's on, they need to make sure they're away from everyone else. They don't want anyone else within that circle. You're going to get these novas that spawn, and you'll also have the static cling mechanic go out at the same time. You want to kill those little novas, the little adds, and then you want to jump right as static cling goes off. That way you do not get rooted to the floor. And then when he does his lightning storm, you want to make sure to be in that lightning field as we all just were. So again, we kill an add. Get the Nova down. We're jumping to avoid the static cling there. We're back on boss, and then he's going to go ahead and spawn another lightning field here shortly after this next add. We're jumping to avoid the static cling. We're killing the Nova. Adds are always priority on this boss. This is the safe zone. And so he just continues to do this all the way to the very end. Now what you're going to see, and I'll just let this play out for the rest of the fight, is that we actually are going to have our priest go down, and we're going to lose the adept. So that is the risk of mind controlling the adept here. Luckily we had enough throughput to survive the boss, and then from there we had enough people up, including myself, to go ahead and get this adept down. So hopefully this helps you guys get into those 20s and above. Any feedback that you can leave is always appreciated. Good luck out there.